For a long time, I thought being a good reader was being a fast reader, finishing more books, keeping up with the books other people were reading and talking about, moving on to the next book before I had time to digest the one I had just finished, and measuring my reading in numbers, how efficiently I moved through them and how many I could read in a month. But over the past few years, something shifted in me. I realised that speed didn't always equal depth, and some books don't just need time to be read, but they need some time in your life. They need the right season, the right emotional space, and sometimes they need a different version of you. And that's what slow reading has come to mean to me. It's not just about reading a page slowly, but about allowing a book to arrive at the right moment. With all that in mind, I want to share with you today 6 books that mean more to me today because I didn't rush them. The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. The Virgin Suicides is one of my favourite films of all time, and I was very hesitant to read this book because I worried that it would disrupt those emotions I held with the movie and the story. But I was completely wrong. It turns out that the movie is probably one of the most faithful film adaptations I have ever seen, and reading the book unlocked a new element for me. Something quieter and delicate, and I read it over one very hot week in the summer. As I read the book, I would stop mid-sentence to put on the song that was being referenced in the book, letting it play as I lingered over the pages. The heat, the music, the tone, it is hazy and atmospheric and emotionally opaque, and it felt immersive in a way that was almost physical. I read this book when I was in my 40s, and I think in hindsight, if I had read it as a teenager when the book was published, I would have entirely missed the point. I would have focused on the drama and the tragedy and just flattened it into plot alone. But having read it later in life and at a distance from those adolescent years, I found myself sitting in the melancholy instead. I understood nostalgia differently, which is such a big element of this book. And that experience made me realise that timing changes interpretation. Some books don't just need reading at the right time, but they need the right version of you. For other books, however, slow reading can begin before the first page is even turned. James by Percival Everett. James had such a significant cultural moment in 2024 that it felt like everybody was reading it at the one time. It was up for so many awards, it was being talked about in different conversations, it was being discussed for an adaptation to a movie. There was so much discourse around it that it felt really difficult to not be peer pressured into reading it while everyone else was. So I could join into that conversation as soon as possible. But I waited. I waited a while. I waited for the discourse to settle. I waited for the hype to go away. And that allowed me to encounter this book much more quietly. You only get one first reading of a book, and I didn't want my interpretation to be shaped by the headlines or other people's conversations. And I didn't want to skim the book just to get to the end so I could participate. So this is a different kind of not rushing. James is contemporary, it is very culturally significant, and it is layered with satire and tradition. And having read it slowly, I feel if I had rushed it, it would have just become a talking point and an adventure book. But reading it slowly, it becomes a once-in-a-lifetime piece of literature. But there are books that demand space, not because of the hype, but because of the weight. The Nightingale by Kristin. I read The Nightingale at a time when the world felt particularly fragile. The war in Gaza had just begun, and we were still emerging from the disorientation from the COVID pandemic. There was a particular moment where I remember having read this on my commute into work, and I walked out of the train station into the city and all of its busyness and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for my safety and for normalcy. This is a plot-driven immersive novel, and if rushed, it can feel just like it's a dramatic historical fiction. But because I slowed it down, I felt something more intimate. I really felt the weight of the cost of what these characters went through. It wasn't just spectacle or another World War II historical fiction, it felt deeply human. And then there are books that need something else entirely, not emotional readiness, but space. East of Eden by Steinbeck. East of Eden was a book I avoided for years because of its size, it's a lot of pages, and because of its reputation. And when I did pick it up, I ended up giving it my entire summer. After I started reading these pages, I found it very difficult to read anything else alongside it. And that surrender surprised me. It has only happened a few times that I can think of. And instead of reading it as a goal, I allowed it to determine my pace. I really lived with these characters rather than rushing towards the ending. This is a novel that is dense with moral reckoning and generational legacy, with biblical echoes, and it really did need that space in my life. And it showed me the difference between having read a book as an accomplishment and living with it. Generally, when I read a book, I tend to read 3 or 4 books at the same time, so I might have been reading this with some other fiction, maybe a thriller, maybe some non-fiction or nature writing. And I remember feeling particularly anxious at one point while reading this because I had spent a month with it, and I had only just recently shared my summer TBR with you. I had all these lovely books lined up for 6 weeks of reading, and here I was 4 weeks later in one book. And letting East of Eden be the only book in my life for a period of time was a real growth period for me, as I realised that nothing bad happens when you spend your time with one book. You don't fall behind, but you go deeper. And sometimes that depth comes from the size of the book, and other times it is something much quieter. The Offing by Benjamin Myers. This was my first introduction to Benjamin Myers, who is now one of my favourite authors. And I can see that this particular book is quintessentially me. It's quiet, it's coastal, it's reflective, character-driven and lyrical, and a strong sense of nature. I fell in love with the cover before I even read a page, and the prose is just so beautiful and a beautiful reflection of the cover, to be honest. I'd describe it as a meandering walk. You know you have to be somewhere, but it's not about getting to the destination, it's about taking your time with the journey, and that's what this felt like. If I had rushed it, I would have missed all of the texture, and to be honest, I would have missed the point of the book itself. Because this isn't a book that is driven by plot urgency. It's driven by atmosphere, and atmosphere requires patience. Time to read a passage over and over, give it room to breathe, to glance out the window at the clouds rolling by and just think about what it is you just read. And then there are books that remind you why you read in the first place. Winnie-the-Pooh by A. Milne. For those of you that have been on my channel for a while, you know I have a soft spot for Pooh. A few years ago, I decided I wanted to reacquaint myself with children's literature, and Winnie-the-Pooh was part of that project. And when I read Winnie-the-Pooh as an adult, I was very surprised at its depth. What once felt quite simple revealed a tenderness and humour and double meanings. At the time I picked up this book, I really did need a bit of a refuge for my life at the time, and spending time in the 100-acre wood definitely gave me what I was looking for. I regularly revisit these books, especially with my grandson, who thankfully loves Winnie-the-Pooh as much as I do, and that sharing has revealed another layer of the enjoyment I get from this book. It feels like reclaiming something, and that experience reminds me that slow reading isn't just about pace, but it is about attention. So like many of us, I really used to put a lot of weight into measuring my reading by the numbers, by the quantity. How many books I finished, whether I was keeping up with what other people were reading, and whether I was moving fast enough. But now I measure it differently. I think about which books linger, which books I carry with me over the months ahead, the ones I can't stop thinking about, the ones I love to recommend, and the ones that change something quietly. Some books are meant to challenge you, and some books are meant to sit beside you. Some arrive at the exact right moment in your life, and often the most important thing you can give to a book isn't speed, but it's attention. If this idea of spending time with a single book resonates with you, I actually shared a video recently around how I built my entire reading this year around one particular book, and I'll link to that at the end. And I'd love to know, what is one book that you are very, very glad you did not rush? Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful week of reading ahead, and I'll speak with you soon. Bye.